Well, good morning and welcome to another edition of SFOF Fiscal Focus. I'm the president of SFOF, Eric Freifels, and I believe that I've had the opportunity to meet most of you. But if I haven't and you're new, welcome. We're really glad that you took the time to join us today. This has been a great series that we started in early February, where we spend a little bit of time just getting to know all of these wonderful elected officials, a little bit more insight into what their offices do, their statutory responsibilities, some of their key staff, and just some of the things that make them tick. So it's been a lot of fun. And today, we're really excited to, we're actually visiting with our first state auditor of the year. And our auditor that serves on our national leadership team, West Virginia Auditor JB McCuskey. So Auditor McCuskey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks y'all for being here.
Yeah, I'm gonna read Auditor McCuskey's short bio. So John JB McCuskey serves as West Virginia's 21st state auditor. Was a two-term member of the House of Delegates from District 35 in Charleston from 2012 to 2016. He is a graduate of the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. with a degree in political communication. That probably comes in handy. He is also a graduate of the West Virginia University College of Law and was previously an attorney for 6 years with Steptoe and Johnson in Charleston. While serving in the West Virginia House of Delegates, Auditor McCuskey was a member of several committees, including Energy, Industry and Labor, Judiciary, Banking and Insurance, which he was the chair of, and Enrolled Bills, which he also served as chair of. Auditor McCuskey was born in Clarksburg and is a longtime resident of Charleston. He's a graduate of George Washington High School, class of 2000. Before attending law school, he worked as a civilian for the Department of Defense at the Pentagon in the offices of the Army and Department of Defense General Counsels. Auditor McCuskey is the son of John F. McCuskey of Charleston. This is interesting, who was the 70th Justice of the Supreme Court of Appeals of West Virginia and former member of the state legislature, and the late Ann McCuskey. He resides in Charleston with his wife, Wendy, who is awesome. If you haven't met Wendy, you're missing out. She's great. They also have three daughters, two daughters, Charlotte Ann and Martha Elizabeth, and they own a small business. So without further ado, please welcome Auditor JB McCuskey. This is welcome. Yeah.
I think we do need to make that bio short. You indicated I had a short bio, and it was not, that was a lie.
Well, compared to some of the others, that was pretty short. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. With regard to college, we like to call that a BA and BS.
There you go. Well, Auditor, thanks.
Yeah,
Why
go
don't
ahead,
you
sorry.
start by just giving us kind of an overview? I think your office probably looks differently than what most of our SFOF members, one, just because you're an auditor, but I think as you and I have even gotten to know each other over the years, your office as auditor is even really different than a lot of other auditors' offices. And so I think it goes back to that old adage that we've said it over and over. You've seen one treasurer's office, you've seen one treasurer's office. If you've seen one auditor's office, you've probably seen one auditor's office. And so why don't you go ahead and just give us a little background, why you got into the office, and a little bit about the office and what you do.
Sure. So coming out of the legislature, one of the things that I found the most frustrating was that the ability to effectuate structural change in government, both in the state government as well as in local governments, was really, really difficult. When you're one of 100 or one of 134, if you include the Senate, occasionally your ideas get muddled, but more importantly than that, change is a very dirty word throughout a bureaucracy, and people will oppose change regardless of its efficacy because it is not their plan. And it's actually just sort of human nature. It's easy to get mad, but it's easy for me, what I've sort of come to realize is that when somebody invented the way that something's done, they're going to react very poorly when you try to change it. And that isn't necessarily their fault. And there are some people who like change, but mostly people who work in state government quite frankly, are very, very interested in having a stable life, stable existence, right? These are people who are looking for a career. And so change comes harder around here. And our state government is wholly top heavy. It is wildly inefficient. And I thought that this office, after doing some pretty significant research, would be the best place for me to do the things that I'm most passionate about in government, and that is reform the way that things are done, make them hopefully less expensive, but certainly more efficient, and create a better user experience for the taxpayer. And so that's how we got to this office. There were, a lot of things about this office that, I knew that we did, but I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to play into that. And this will answer the second part of your question, I think, Derek. So our office is, like you said, different than the rest of them because they're all very different. But we are comprised of several main groups. So the first group, I am what's called the chief inspector, and Mike has this role too, I know for sure. But we are in charge of reviewing the budgets, approving the budgets of every city, county, school board, library commission, economic development corporation, public service commission, all of these things. So we approve their budget and then we audit them at the end of the year. So we tell them that what they're going to spend is okay, and then we review to see if it was spent properly. This is a huge part of our office. It's also one of the things that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but it's one of the sources of change that needs to happen very, very quickly in our world, because as local governments become less populated, their budgets become smaller and their ability to manage their financial health is reduced. It's also where we find the majority of the fraud that our office is in charge of. And so that gets us into our fraud division. We have investigators, prosecutors, as well as essentially deputized police officers who work on our fraud cases. And these are cases that stem from the misuse of public funds in local governments and occasionally within the state government. There's another group that does state government fraud, but we help them a lot. I'm also the land commissioner for the state. So our office is in charge of auctioning all of the tax delinquent property for all the 55 counties. If the property is not sold at the auction, we then have to hold it and attempt to sell it going forward. We own hundreds of thousands of pieces of property and sell roughly 50,000 pieces of property every year. It doesn't sound like that's that important, but it's actually a huge deal and probably the source of the largest amount of litigation that our office gets into, because people will sue us claiming that we didn't notify the right group of people to sell the property. It's sort of a nightmare, and we have some legislation to try to fix that. I'm also the securities commissioner for the state. So we're in charge of licensing all of the broker dealers in the state. We're also in charge of investigating securities fraud and securities violations. So we have more investigators and sort of quasi police officers who are in charge of doing that. And interestingly, this year, my general counsel who's in charge of securities is the president of the National Securities Commissioners Association. And so it's a really, really great honor for her. She's really excited, and we're hoping that as COVID starts to wane here, we're going to be able to have that meeting in West Virginia with all of the 50 other states' securities commissioners. And I think, the only auditor who does that. It's possible that I think maybe the state of Washington's does too, but it's a little bit different. And then I think that's it, Steve, isn't it? Did I get them all? Yeah. So that's our whole, and I'm in charge of the state's Enterprise Resource Board. So we are in charge of the integrated accounting computer system that links all of the bureaucracies together, so that we can pay, we do payroll for 60,000 people and we pay all the state's invoices. I actually forgot the most important one. The state auditor function of our office is that we audit all of the state's payments. So all of the payments that go out are audited by our office. And then we are the official bookkeeper, which is where we get into the checkbook site. So we keep the book for the public, for the bureaucracies themselves, and for the legislature.
That's great. I've always found, as we've had conversations, JB, that your securities commissioner's role is one of the most fascinating ones to me.
I have no idea how it got in this office. I really don't.
Someone in the sausage making process years ago decided it was a good idea, and so we're glad.
It probably got wrestled away from somebody. It generates a pretty significant amount of revenue.
Yeah. Do you want to, I saw Jeff Wainwright on here, and we've had the privilege of getting to know Jeff over the years. Do you want to introduce any of your key
Sure.
staff?
So I've got three folks on here with me. So Jeff is on here. Jeff's my chief of staff. He's right there. He's across the hallway. We also have Steve Conley's in my office over here. He's my general counsel. And then Anthony Woods is on, and Anthony is our director of transparency projects. And he'll be able to talk to you guys a little bit more about some pretty neat things that he has built and that we are going to be implementing here in the next year and a half or so.
Well, let's talk about some of those things because you have been kind of a torchbearer, if you will, in terms of state government in West Virginia, and even regionally with other helping other state leaders kind of think through this. But you know, you have really kind of grabbed a hold of technology and learned how to utilize it to maximize productivity, and in state government that's rare. And so talk a little bit about Project Mountaineer.
Sure. So when we started 4 years ago, we realized that we had a holistic problem with our ability to finish and complete the municipal and county audits in a timely fashion, and in sometimes at all. A lot of our audits get bid out. We have a lot of really bad accounting firms that do this work. Bad even to the point of being untoward. And so we needed to figure out a new way to get these audits completed for a multitude of reasons, but not the least of which is that without a complete accounting of what all the cities and counties are doing, the legislature is incapable of accurately appropriating money to them to make sure that they're able to survive. And so working with Anthony and some of our other vendors as well, we have created an integrated cloud-based ERP system that will be deploying out to all of our cities and counties. And what this will do is it will upload in real time all of the financial data for the cities and counties, and will give us the ability to start applying some of the concepts of artificial intelligence and benchmarking so that we can monitor the fiscal health of these cities. Meaning that if they are going to go bankrupt or there's going to be a huge problem, we'll know 6 months or 3 months or 5 months before there's a giant problem. So we can either help them fix it, help them dissolve, or force them to dissolve and sell off their assets. What that prevents is this catastrophic failure that is imminent for many, many of our cities, wherein the water system gets turned off, the police officers get fired, the roads deteriorates. Cities and counties provide services to the people that live there. And if a city is to cease to exist, it renders essentially every home and all of the property in that area valueless, because you can't have a house without water and sewer and police and fire. It's not workable. On the other side, what this will do is it's going to feed our college program, where we are allowing fourth-year accounting students to do our local government audits. And so because the software is cloud-based, and because all of the audits will be coming in a unified way, our office is able to we are professors at WVU and Marshall and a couple of other colleges. And so the fourth-year accounting students' final project is to complete one of these audits for one of these little cities who couldn't afford it. And it gives us the ability to start to review some of the talent that's coming out of our universities from an accounting realm to hopefully fill in some of our spots. And Mike, I can see you shaking your head. My guess is you have the same problem I do in hiring. So the other side of this Project Mountaineer involves the students. We have
very much so.
We have 40 open positions. We're about 40% staffed in our CID division. And what happens is when we get good folks, the firms snatch them up because they're paying 15, 20% more. And so the way this program works is, I don't know how many other lawyers we have on the line, but in law school, the smart kids go work for the federal government, right? So, and I wasn't one of these smart kids, so I didn't, but the really, really smart kids end up at federal judges' offices or at the U.S. Attorney's office. And so we're trying to make our office sort of the #1 first place for the smart kids to work. So we are having the big firms in the big accounting firms in West Virginia hold spots for kids coming out of our program. So they'll be with us for the first 5 years of their career, and then they will immediately have a job waiting for them at the big firm. And our hope is that if we can control the turnover, we won't have these giant lapses in our total employment. And so we think all of these things put together will give us the ability to finish the audits, to staff our office, and to protect the people that live in these municipalities that are having some pretty significant financial turmoil right now. On top of, all of these things are going to push into a transparency website so that the citizens of all the governments that are involved will have real-time access to all their data as well.
That's really great. And that's really smart of you, because I know that turnover in state agencies across the country is a huge issue. I can't even imagine what it's like trying to find qualified folks that can run, an audit of all things. I remember my days in a state treasurer's office ran into the same issues, and it was difficult and took a lot of creativity. So kudos to you and your team for really trying to position yourself as the go-to state agency to want to work for, because man, that is hard. There's a huge financial disparity between salaries in state government service and private sector. And it's hard to keep and retain and recruit. So
well, and kids move around a lot.
Yeah.
So sort of our idea here is that the first 5 years when you're 22 to 27, what I give you is flexibility, right? I mean, you're going to be working 35 hours, only 49 weeks a year. And so if you're somebody who likes to ski and raft and do all this other stuff, and you're not married, you don't have kids, you don't really need money. And so what we're going to give you is the ability to create your own clients. You're going to be on your own. You're going to be driving around all over the place. And we think that your lifestyle is, I'm old enough now to realize that I wish I would have had more fun when I was 23 than less, right? And so, hopefully what these people will see is that this is the best first job they can have. And then, they'll move in to go make some real money in the firms when they get done.
Yeah. Let's change topics and talk a little bit about transparency. I would say that from my perspective, when we talk to state leaders across the country, there's probably a list of top 5 state elected officials that have become standard bearers when it comes to issues of transparency in their state, and you're always on that list. And so I think it's something that is badly needed. I think many of our folks are continuing to push for. I always ask the question, when you get a Republican or a Democrat who opposes transparency, what are they trying to hide? What are they scared of? Talk a little bit about how you've pushed on transparency issues in West Virginia.
Well, sure. I'll tell you what our big push right now is that we have a bill that creates an economic development transparency portal. And so what we found is that the dollars that are given to companies through economic development programs passed by the legislature are never followed, or rarely followed. And so what happens is you get this great big event, and some politician will stand up and say, we're going to give 50 million of your dollars to this, this, and this, and it's going to create these many jobs, and we're going to reform this, we're going to do that and that and that. And then nobody ever looks at it again, right? And invariably, what ends up happening is none of those things happen, right? I mean, the idea that government can stimulate growth is a very positive one, but I think the idea that we waste a ton of money on economic development is also just true. And so we are getting an incredible amount of pushback. We got this bill passed last year, 100-0 in the legislature, and then the Senate didn't even take it up because our state development office killed the bill. The bill is getting ready to pass the House again, and the development office is doing the exact same thing because they don't want to have to provide the data. And I think they'd probably be okay with it if it was just how much are we spending on this, but the site requires them to actually update all of the promises from all of the, because there's a contract signed with all these things, right? It says we're going to do these things. And so the site requires them to update how many jobs were created, how much pavement was put down, how much tax revenue was created, all of the things that they say make it worth it. And it's been a real slog. And so that is sort of our next sort of frontier, because we don't have access to the secondary data. I know how much they're spending. I don't know how many jobs they're creating. I don't know how much product is being produced. I don't know how much we now have to buy or sell or whatever, any of the things that are part of these economic development promises, and they're loath to give up the information. And so the legislature really wants it, and we'll see if they can overcome the bureaucratic nightmare that occurs. On the sort of general concept, what you said is true. People that don't want transparency are hiding something. And it sucks to say it that way, but it's just absolutely true. And so 2 years ago, we fought with our 55 county school boards because they didn't want any of their records to be online. And the reason is because they knew that everybody'd figure out that half the money was being spent on the top and less than 20% was being spent on the teachers, right? So the teachers were striking and they were blaming the state legislature and the state government, but the real problems were occurring directly in their own school boards, where their school board superintendent had 15 deputies that were all making $115,000 a year, right? And the money was getting stuck in the board and never getting back down to the educator side. And these are the things that the people that are at the top never want the people at the bottom to know. But we were able to get that done. We now have a searchable 55 county school board transparency site that shows how every dollar that's appropriated by the state is then spent by the 55 county school boards. The overall goal for all of these things needs to be is voter education, right? So none of this matters if people aren't looking at it. And our biggest challenge truly is to get people to care enough to want to go on the site. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no transparency site, did anybody know that we wasted money? It would be sort of the mixed analogy, but people need to use it and they need to tell the government what they're doing wrong, because that's really, the tool is useless if it isn't used.
Yeah, it's for all of those state elected officials that are on here, transparency is one of those implied duties, that should just be implied and assumed. And so many of you are doing so many great things. And I think it's probably one of those areas that can help solve so many issues, both financial, political, and so to keep pushing and breaking through those barriers where Republicans and Democrats are working together to shield information like that from the public, is, as Auditor McCuskey said, with the school board situation. Like, the more that we can push for that, the more that we can do that and bring it into the light, the better off everyone is. It's just awesome.
Well, the next great push is going to be to have the federal government do it. And I think what we all saw is what happens when you draft a bill with no information. And so the other great thing about transparency is it provides data to decision makers. And they just passed a $2 trillion COVID bill, gave how much to the local governments? Was it 500 billion? Give or take, something like that. It was more than went to people, but they literally don't know how much money the states, counties, and cities lost. They guessed. I mean, think about taking a $500 billion guess with somebody else's money. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense to me.
Just a side note on that, I was having a conversation with one of my favorite members of the Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives a couple nights ago, who said that COVID relief bill accounts for about 9 cents of a dollar gets applied to actual COVID relief. 9 cents of a dollar. It's crazy. And that's probably being generous in his estimate. Last point, you hear this from Silicon Valley, you hear this from tech startups, if you're reading business journal publications and stuff like that a lot, but I haven't heard this from too many state elected officials, that they're starting to dive into other services and ways to work with artificial intelligence in their state government offices. You are. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we think that it's going to be really, really valuable in a couple of applications. On the audit side, the state audit side, we have 15,000 payment requisitions going through a day. And every single one of those requisitions has to essentially be compared to a contract, and all the terms have to be reviewed. And, there's a certain amount of fraud that occurs in all expenditures. It's government, private, doesn't matter. It's like 4 or 5%. And what we don't have the capability of doing is doing a sufficient review of everything to find out what's fraud. So we need to figure out a way to filter the things that are obviously not fraud out, so that the pile of things that might be fraud gets much smaller. And so what we are working on is building some capability of the comparisons happening in an artificially intelligent environment so that the human eyes don't touch anything until it gets further down the road. Meaning the Department of Transportation sends in a bill for $800,000 for aggregate. And we believe that the computer can very, very easily be taught to compare the line items of the contract with the invoice in a way that we can ensure that that is not something that has a high propensity for fraud or inaccuracy. And then start to pick the things out that do have a higher propensity for fraud and inaccuracy. On the local government side, it's more of a filtering of totality of government finances. So the audits that occur in the cities and counties are extensive, they're long, there's tons of data in them. And we think that if we can start to filter that data through the software, it can build on itself and understand, if you're 3 months behind on your federal payroll tax, you are 80% more likely to experience a bankruptcy within 6 months. Or if you will be able to tell them that if their water systems are being overextended, right? If there's too much water being used or the electricity at the site, there's a whole myriad of ways that we think that we can download their data and filter it through these things to give us a more condensed and accurate look at what's actually happening.
So so your development of AI in your office, is it, have you had the luxury of having someone on your team that was trained in that area? Are you working on developing public-private partnership to help bring a vendor in to help work on that? And my other question to that is, what have you got any pushback from your state, your House of Delegates or the legislature, from people that are scared of the technology or worried that it's going to be too efficient and too honest?
There hasn't been any pushback yet. We are using sort of a combination of vendors and people on staff. Anthony, do you want to chime in here? So Anthony's sort of our resident expert on this stuff. And Anthony's actually the person who built the accounting, the cloud-based ERP for our local governments. And he'd actually be able to a little bit more intelligently discuss this than I even could. So.
Okay. Anthony, are you with us?
I am with you. Sure. So thanks, JB. So what we're starting with, we're trying to take some baby steps into this. And what we're doing is we're really looking at patterns and really looking at things that we know in our experience here in the auditor's office could be problematic. And when JB's talking about transactions that come through our office, we can look at transactions that if we know, like, for example, that there are a public defender's payment for legal services for those who can't afford their own attorney that our office handles. We can look at the funding information and the budget codes that come through. And if there's any that are incorrect, we can identify those before they even get to one of our auditors. And we can reject that payment back, similar to kind of how the IRS can look and see if there's an issue with your tax filing before it even gets to the system. So we've identified some efficiencies there that we can really leverage to make our job easier. And for the local government side, with our Project Mountaineer, where we're looking at this financial data in real time in these local governments, we can identify factors that could suggest fiscal distress. For example, if you have a local government who is not keeping up with their IRS payments for their payroll withholdings, that could be a signal of fiscal distress. We're also looking at other metrics, such as if a particular local government's tax base is heavily centered on one industry or one major employer in the area, that could be a warning sign, because if there's issues with that particular entity, that can really trickle down to that local government. So we're really starting this process by looking at these patterns in our state agencies and our local governments and identifying what are the key patterns that suggest we need to really take a look at things and see where the trouble spots are. And with that cloud-based ERP that we're planning on deploying and really getting out there, it's really giving the people the tools that they need to succeed. We actually had the volunteer fire departments come into our audit purview recently with some legislation that has passed. And when we went into these volunteer fire departments, some of these entities were keeping their accounting on pencil and paper. They were literally running down to Office Depot and getting that green bar column paper. And that's how they were doing a lot of their financial record keeping. And of course, that is not an efficient or effective way to really bring yourself into a full rounded accounting system. It's ripe for fraud, it's error prone, it takes time, and especially if you have to compile financial statements, that's really putting pressure on that appointed treasurer of that VFD. So we provided them with an accounting package that is customized to exactly what they need as far as their fire operations. We've expanded that to some of our small municipalities. So they have a budgeting tool, they have an accounts payable tool, and it can compile basic financial statements. And for all of these initiatives in our office, we're looking to continually expand and improve upon them to have that all-encompassing technical package that can assist our audit staff and really assist the entity at little to no cost to them.
And the cost part is really interesting because when you look at it, and Kentucky has what, like 200 counties? You guys have a ton of counties, right?
120.
120, and you probably have 400 cities at least, right?
I think, yeah, it's like 435 or something. Yeah.
And so if every single one of them is buying an accounting system, right? They all cost $50,000, $60,000 up front, and then they cost $8,000, $10,000 a year in maintenance, right? And so you're really talking in a place like Kentucky, maybe $30, $40 million a year just in expenses associated with multiple accounting systems. When you buy something once, it's way less expensive, and then we get to control how it comes to us. And so what it gives our auditors the ability to do is that now all of the financial statements that come from these local governments are exactly the same. So we're making something that used to not be a widget into a widget, right? And so it is now something they can do at home. It's reducing our travel expenses. It's reducing the local government's expenses on having to buy these ERP systems. And it's giving us the ability to be both more transparent, less expensive, as well as to employ some of these other concepts to monitor their financial health, because no city wants to go under. I'm sure the rural areas of Kentucky and some of your other states are having some of the same exact problems that we are. But we have cities that used to have 10,000 people that have literally 300. And so, when you have infrastructure costs that are that high and then you have revenue that's that low, you have to start making very, very difficult decisions about whether or not incorporation is worth it, and what are the downsides to maintaining yourself. And it is our hope that we can start to delayer some of this government that was really based on bygone concepts and things that are kind of unneeded at this point.
Yeah, and to echo something Anthony said, when I first got into the state treasury world and was looking into one of our divisions, we had people keeping records on index cards, and it was a very elaborate, pretty well thought through system, but it fundamentally was wrong, broken because it was all on these little index cards. And so, I think we would be appalled if we would kind of be able to look under the hood in every state agency across America to see, especially on the local government level, how many city clerks, county clerks are still using antiquated methods to keep records, either out of fear of technology or unwillingness to learn or budget issues. I'm going to open it up to some questions now. I know Treasurer or Auditor McCuskey has a hard stop at 11:45 today, so I want to respect his time. So we've got about 9 minutes. But I see sponsors here from JP Morgan, from ITDM, from Clearwater Analytics, from OpenGov, and want to see, I know we've got several other state partners on here. It looks like we have a quorum now from Kentucky. So we've got our friends in Kentucky well represented. And so would love to just open it up and see if anyone's got a question. There is one from Greg Mullins. Did the state of West Virginia create this accounting package or buy it at an enterprise level and share that way?
Anthony built it. So the guy that was just speaking actually built it at home. It wasn't working. So we could have bought it. we have something called CGI Advantage software, which is what our ERP, state ERP board has. I inherited this product as well as our ERP. CGI is wonderful software, but it got deployed in a very, very bad way, such that basically everyone thinks it's the worst thing ever. If they had implemented it better before I got here, we could have sold it to the counties and cities to use that software, I think. But if we'd said, hey, you're going to use Oasis, they would have told us to pound sand because it has such a bad an unneeded bad reputation. But Anthony built it, and quite frankly, this was a much better solution because his is so much more simple, and it is literally built to be deployed into places where people have never used accounting software before.
Great question. Let's see. Someone asked the question: when you build in-house, are you worried about key person risk and maintenance? I think key person risk meaning that you could lose that person tomorrow, and then he takes away all of the knowledge and information.
Well, no, that's a phenomenal question. I'm sure Anthony's going to be listening very diligently to my answer. So we actually, we have it pretty legally well set up here to where, he has built us a system, but if it is to be sold or deployed other places, it's his intellectual property. So we own it in West Virginia because he built it as part of our office, but it is also something that he will have the ability to market to places that aren't under the purview of the auditor's office.
Good for you, Anthony. There's your
retirement.
retirement.
A long time. I mean, that was, it took us longer probably to do the paperwork than him to build the system, which is why lawyers are so wealthy, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's your retirement plan, Anthony. Good job. Well, who else has a question?
We probably need to just follow up with you individually at some point because I'm really interested in this accounting system you've set up. One of the things that we've had trouble with the whole time I've been in office is we've wanted the local governments to be able to use our transparency website, but we can't because they use different accounting systems all over, just across the board. Same thing you just described. So I would love to know, did you absorb a hefty cost? I know Anthony built it, but was it a major expense to be able to create that to begin with?
Yeah, it could be. It's really, when you're talking about your transparency site, it's about the interface. And so the problem with interfacing is that you probably have, you might have 50 or 60 different iterations of accounting software in Kentucky. And it's not a small undertaking to link two non-speaking accounting systems together. There are products on the market for local governments that quite frankly have just basically come on the market. It's sort of a new thing. I know that I can see Greg down there on the bottom. I think from what I understand that he probably has a better understanding of what that process looks like, but it is always cheaper to buy it once and license it, right? So you are whether or not you are willing to spend $15 million or whatever it costs, that's different than it is going to cost $50 million for all of them to have it. So there's always a cost benefit to it. It's just a matter of whether or not the state's going to give you the money to do it, as opposed to all the local governments doing it themselves. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the other big plus having a company like OpenGov or somebody, one of these many fintech companies do something like that is they can make it understandable to the average taxpayer, right? Like so many states say, well, we've got transparency, but if you go to their websites, you got to be a public finance expert to understand how they've laid it all out, and it becomes just very unclear. And so, using some of these other vendors and companies and doing it in a way where the back end can be complicated enough to pull all that information together into one place, but at the same time, I can set my grandmother down in front of a computer and she's going to be able to understand how to go in and look how much Department of Housing and Labor has spent on vehicles for that year.
You're making the biggest point is that the transparency websites are only as good as who looks at them.
Right.
If they're unusable by average people, then nobody's going to look at them.
Absolutely. There's Greg.
And hey guys, maybe I can chime in for a second too. I love all of this conversation. So my name is Greg Keeney and I work at OpenGov. And we're the leader in modern cloud ERP software for our nation's cities and state agencies now. And this has been a journey that we've been on for many years now. And really just to add onto what Derek and JB are talking about, there's really been this big tectonic shift really over the last decade or so. Certainly that's the case in GovTech, in how software is built, developed, and deployed. And really the end goal there, is easier user interface, software that's really powerful under the hood, but easy enough for non-finance experts to use, so it can impact a broader group inside of an organization, but powerful enough for the real finance experts to do all the robust reporting and budget collaboration and kind of all the things that you would expect your ERP system to be able to do. And then, because of being kind of modern multi-tenant software as a service, which means, everyone has delivered the same product. It's updated all the time. So anytime a user logs into the software, they're on the newest version. So there aren't these super expensive constant updates that one needs to pay for every couple of years. And really the end goal there is much higher reliability, much better security, and then lower total cost of ownership for the customer. So it's really a win-win-win for kind of everybody involved. And we're super proud to be kind of leading the charge away from a lot of these legacy softwares that, honestly are still around, but they're too small to innovate. They're barely keeping the lights on. And it's not even that they don't want to. I think it's just that the industry has changed so much that they can't keep up anymore. And, kind of folks that are more focused on modern methods of developing software, I think are going to be the ones that really are around for the long haul, to be frank.
Yeah, and just to probably tie a bow on this, because I do have to go in a minute. I think the one thing I'd like to sort of leave everybody with is what I've found in my office and in the way that we interplay in modern life is the most valuable commodity in the entire world is data. There is almost nothing else that matters to big finance and to big everything than data. And we are now the keepers of the most valuable asset in all of government. We know where all the money is spent, right? We know where all the bodies are buried. We know how everyone is doing everything and why. And so people are going to be looking to us to be leaders in how do we manage the government's data? How do we get it to the people in a way that is public? And how do we get it to the decision makers to make sure that they are using accurate real-time information to make really, really, really important decisions with other people's money? And so I think that we have all sort of been elected to these offices in a really, really curious time, and probably in a time when our reach and our impact will be the highest that it's ever been. So, as far as everybody on here is concerned, I know that we're all in really good hands.
Well, that's great. And I want to go ahead and just thank you, thank you, Auditor, for being with us today. We have a new treasurer in West Virginia too. We're excited about, we love our two folks in West Virginia. So thank you to
Thanks,
Jeff.
guys. Derek, thank you. Melanie, thank you. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Jeff Wainwright, thank you to the team, and Anthony for all you guys do to keep JB going behind the scenes. We know that without some of these talented staffers, just things wouldn't get done and wouldn't be possible. So great job. Just a reminder quickly, next Tuesday, we'll be talking to Missouri Treasurer Scott Fitzpatrick. We're going to have a week off in between that, and then we will talk to our Kentucky Treasurer, Allison Ball, on March the 30th, followed by Louisiana Treasurer Don Schroeder, who is still working at his desk very diligently at the moment. So we appreciate you all very much. And
Derek, some of us have to earn a paycheck, we can't.
There you go. I know.
You just can't sit around listening to you all day.
Well, I appreciate it very much, Treasurer. So all of you, thank you for your time. Thanks to all of our sponsors who took the time to be here today, and we'll hope to see you next week. Have a good day.